Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk, Israel National Radio. Today is the 29th day of the month of Nisan, 5774. It's also April 29th, 2014. And it's 2 weeks, 14 days and 2 weeks to the counting of the Omer. In this week's Torah portion, in fact, parashat Emor, Leviticus 23, is where we find the commandment of Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. So first of all, to all of our dear listeners that we cherish so much and appreciate, we apologize that we have not been with you for a little while. In fact, we expected to renew our Temple Talk broadcast last week, but we had some circumstances out of our control. Yitzchak Reuven, my best friend, and yours too, he was really not feeling well. He was racked by fever, and he had some sort of flu. And I think he's better now. How are you, Yitzchak?
I'm feeling much better. On the road to recovery.
Your voice is still not.
Voice is still a little froggy. A bit of a frog in my voice, in my throat.
And actually, I wasn't doing that well myself.
No, you looked horrible last week.
Oh, thank you so much.
Gosh, oof.
So we had these difficulties last week. And so we wish you a wonderful period of the counting of the Omer, now that Pesach is behind us and we are proceeding to the main event. The absolute proof of our freedom, which is the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. First of all, there's been a lot going on. I got to tell you the truth. Even if we were able to broadcast last week, I mean, as the Torah teaches us, everything that Hashem does, all the obstacles and all the things that come up that keep us from something, it's all for good. It's all for the good. Even if you have an impediment, it's all for the good. And I agree, because the truth is, you know what? I think we were not capable of talking last week even because we were so overwrought. Even if we would have been feeling well, which we weren't, I don't see how we would have done a show last week. And you know what? Let's tell them the truth. All right? I'm going to tell you all the truth. We actually, under the circumstances of Yitzchak's extreme illness and everything else that we were going through, we actually sat down and we tried to record a temple talk last week. It didn't go for us so well. And the main reason is because we were tremendously just overwrought by everything that has been going on regarding the plight of the Temple Mount, as you've probably been reading, many of you who follow the Temple Institute and who especially follow our Facebook page, where we are very careful to update, sometimes more than twice a day, what's been going on. The season of Passover, which is the Festival of Freedom, and of course, which is the hallmark of which is the bringing of the Passover offering, regarding which, by the way, we had a very successful and wonderful seminar before Passover that was attended by probably around 1,000 people. That just shows something of the tremendous desire and interest for the renewal of all things temple-related and the Passover offering and temple consciousness. But anyway, the period of Passover was marked by unprecedented violence against the Jewish people who desired to show themselves on the Temple Mount and be seen there by God and fulfill the biblical commandment of being seen there. Unprecedented violence, and also unprecedented, I guess I'd call it chutzpah, or unprecedented impotent capitulation and lack of backbone, spine, and reactionaryism of the powers that be. And that the reason that this Passover was different from all other Passovers, if I might quip the Passover type of questioning, is because the closure began even before Passover. In other words, the template that's been in effect recently, in recent years, is that the Muslims, they make sure that the Temple Mount is off limits to the Jews on their holidays. And then they started making sure that the Temple Mount is off limits to the Jews on the Jewish holidays. But this year on Passover, Manishtana, Passover was different because they began on the eve of Passover. So other than here and there, an hour here or there, half an hour, attempts that were made to open the Temple Mount and quickly rush the Jews through, literally, I myself, on the seventh day, the eve of the seventh day of the festival, in a very highly publicized attempt to bring a very important American rabbi there. We were there altogether for about 2 minutes under a barrage of rocks and projectiles and homemade incendiary devices. The amount of people that came to go up to the Temple Mount over Passover, that stood in line, that waited to go up, must have been in the thousands. Unbelievable desire expressed by all of Israel to be connected to the Temple Mount. The pronouncements that were made in the press regarding this, the updates that we ourselves placed on the Temple Institute Facebook page, you can read all about it now if you like, in hindsight. It's just all so, the angst is so powerful because basically the Temple Mount was taken over by a bunch of thugs who decided that they will flex a little bit. I can't even call it muscle. It's basically just, it's not even threat. What is it that they flexed exactly? The police, from what I saw the day that I went up, they were there in full force. They could have done anything. They could have taken over the mosque, the Al-Aqsa, where, by the way, the Muslims were well prepared. And we showed photographs on our Facebook page. It's just so outlandish. I don't even know if I can even say these things. It's just how do the words come out? We showed photographs of the interior of the holy place to the Muslims, where they were stockpiling just these heaps of stones and boulders that they kept in the middle of their prayer rugs facing Mecca, I suppose, that they brought in under cover of darkness, and then they went and barricaded themselves inside the mosque, their place of prayer, right? Isaiah, it's a house of prayer for all people. And then they came running out of the mosque with these stones, throwing them at the Jews, throwing them at the police, throwing them over the side. And the police have this rule, which comes from the highest office in the land, that they can't go into the mosque. And they can't, not only they can't go into the mosque, they can't lift a finger. They don't deal with this violence. The way that they deal with it is by rewarding the agitator and punishing the victim. It's the template that's been in effect now for so long consistently. When that happens, when they riot, the Temple Mount is immediately closed to Jews, and the Jews are removed. Is there one arrest made? No. Is there any sort of attempt to implement Israeli law and sovereignty? Could this kind of thing happen anywhere else in the world? Would the Jews be punished if they started inciting a race riot against others?
The crime begins even before what you've just described, because they couldn't be up in the Temple Mount with all their rocks and with all their flags and with their food that they celebrate it with, and with everything they brought, without the passive collaboration of the Israeli police and the Israeli security forces. Forget, the police are told not to flex any muscles. They could have been prevented very very non-violently from being up there in the first place. Obviously, there was intelligence that this was going to happen, because anything that happens here, there's intelligence. The Israeli securities services are actually quite
impeccable.
Efficient.
Honestly, they really are.
And if there is, an attempted terror attack in Tel Aviv that originates in Shechem, they can stop it before it gets to the checkpoint, because they know all about it. So obviously, The security forces knew all about what was being planned, and they didn't do a thing about it.
Either
And
they couldn't stop it, or they chose not to stop it, or they were told that they're not allowed to intervene.
they chose not to stop it, or they were told not to intervene. However, when the security forces sit down with the prime minister, the security forces, if they feel that there is a need for urgent action to be taken to prevent something, they will make that very clear to the prime minister. And it's unlikely that the prime minister will say no, especially when something can be prevented without it being, in the news, without it being a big show. So
in general, you're saying that that's how things work in this country.
right.
When the security
So
source
I
needs to
question,
appraise the prime
where
minister,
this conspiracy begins. Who
because
really is
Yitzchak, when it
behind
comes
it?
to the Temple Mount, that doesn't apply. You're talking about a situation where the Shabak will come with all their professionals to the prime minister and say such and such has to be done with such and such a situation, and the prime minister will give his permission. That doesn't happen when it comes to the Temple Mount, because the Temple Mount is subject to that bizarre.
But the prevention of allowing people up, and Israel does, when they prevent, people, Muslims from under the age of 40.
Oh, because they're
go
considered to be more likely to be
or from
rioters.
over the green line to go up. And secondly, the prevention would be outside the borders of the Temple Mount.
Okay, so then we're back to your question. How is it possible that basically, to quote all the journalists in Hebrew who wrote this and all the members of Knesset who discussed this during the week of Passover and the week afterwards, if that is the case, then how is it possible that literally, and I quote, the Temple Mount became occupied by Hamas completely? They were Hamas parades, Hamas rallies, Hamas flags, celebrations, cadres of Hamas gangs on the Temple Mount. How is it possible that this happened and they didn't know about it? Unless they did know about it, and the choice was because of this complicated tango between Abdallah, the Star Trekkie, and Netanyahu, and all the other factors. And who knows what maybe the future of the peace negotiations, maybe the deal with the Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, maybe everything else is hanging in the balance. Who knows? American pressure? I don't know. The fact is, it's always the Jews who are the offering.
I don't think it's any of those reasons. I think it really boils down to some kind of inside-out, twisted thinking in the Jewish minds of our prime minister and other people who have any kind of say in this matter. I think they're just are so twisted and contorted in their thinking. They don't understand what's up and what's down, what's left and what's right anymore. Yesterday, Rabbi, was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and the prime minister at the opening ceremony gave a very powerful speech, saying, there are still forces out there that want to destroy the Jewish people. And of course, he was referring and said so quite clearly to the Iranians.
He basically urged the world not to allow Iran to create another Holocaust.
And how does that jibe? And some people say, oh, Yitzchak, you're exaggerating. Where are you going with this? This is the Holocaust you're talking about. But how does his stand, very forceful, very never again stand, how does that jibe with the total implosion of Jewish pride, of Jewish history, of Jewish never again on the Temple Mount, because the Temple Mount is the place of the original Holocaust, the Holocaust that began
all Holocaust,
that began the 2,000-year exile that ended with the Holocaust.
That is, you are perfect, because there is no Holocaust without the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people. We were holocausted because we were exiled from our land, and it's all about this place. Exactly. So
never again. So, reinstitute Jewish prayer in the holiest place on earth, lefachot, at the very least.
So all of this continued all throughout Passover. It was a total disgrace. It was basically the very opposite of what the Festival of Freedom means. It was horrific. We tried every day to go on, and It was just like this national disgrace that you could barely, if you were at all spiritual and connected to what it means to be a Jew in the land of Israel and what Passover means for the Jewish people forever, how could you lift your face up when you saw the images of this total, decadent, Neanderthal, orgy of violence, and is that a soft G or a hard G? I never.
Soft.
Of violence and mob mentality on the Temple Mount. The police basically absolutely emasculated, worthless, meaningless, accommodating, facilitating, complicit, and then this all reached a peak in a way that had no precedent, and in a way that, fortunately, begrudgingly, some of the media picked up on here in Israel. Again, the major media chose to ignore it, but some of the second tier or even upper tier decided to, yes, address the issue, and that is that on the day after Passover, there was a ascent made by a group of Jews, pious Jews, Haredi Jews, with their families, and they went up to the Temple Mount, little children and their families, and they were permitted to ascend, but they were set upon by a mob
Hundreds.
It was literally hundreds of people. And you know what? It wasn't like it was during Passover when it was basically 20 or 30 masked young Neanderthals. It was older people. It was older women. It was men and women and children, Muslim, if that's what they are, of all age, following, caterwauling, throwing things, spitting, even pulling at their peyot, at their hair, calling them names, in their face, swearing at them, spitting in their face, cursing them, and the police were there. And the police basically were like, I don't even know how to describe it. They didn't make a buffer. They didn't touch the agitators. This just went on and on. Eventually, they made the Jews leave earlier. Then a second group of Jews came and stayed a little bit longer. Somebody videoed this. It was pretty homespun. It was pretty amateur, this video. And that video was seen, thank God, by many tens of thousands of people, and it was translated a little bit into English, the comments that were made in the background, the fathers talking to their children. And some major journalists and commentators and politicians have seen it here in Israel, and it became really part of debate and dialogue and consensus here that everyone was talking about it, to the extent that meetings are held and all sorts of people that don't normally talk about the Temple Mount have been talking about it because of this film, because they're saying, like, this is absolutely insane. I didn't realize that it's so sick. I didn't realize that Jews are treated like this. I didn't realize, and people, that you wouldn't believe. Yitzchak was just telling me about a mainstream secular centrist media personality here in Israel that basically said, you know what? Why don't we close the Temple Mount to Muslims for a few years? And just for him to have the audacity to make a statement like that, someone who doesn't normally associate or identify with the Temple Mount, shows that there is something going on here. So that was a huge upheaval, that film. You can still see it. And of course, people commented, that people wrote on Facebook, whoa, I don't think children should be brought there. That was so irresponsible. Why would people bring their children here? So first of all, a lot of you that are listening have been to the Temple Mount with me. And you know that, generally speaking, it can go very well. It can go very peacefully. It usually does. And that's the goal. And sometimes there is a bit of difficulty. And if it would be very violent, usually the police would just close it. But the fact is, you know what? As soon as we say that we're not going there, or we're not going anywhere because we're being threatened, then why are we here? Yesterday was Holocaust Memorial Day. What's the state of Israel after 66 years? Next week is the Israel Independence Day. This is where we have come. Remember? This is where we have come because of what was happening to us in the world. So you're going to tell me that at the holy place, the only holy place, not the holiest, but the only holy place that we have in the middle of Yerushalayim, our undivided, supposedly eternal capital, that there's a place that I can't go after the Holocaust and after everything, it's not only this place I can't go, but it's the only place that I really should be going to. I can't go there. And on the contrary, we believe that our children have to be educated to love this place, to revere this place, to know that this is the place that Hashem chose, to know that this is the place where it's a mitzvah for them to be seen here by God, to know that this is the future, that all the prophets spoke about this place, that it's the center of creation, that Adam was created here, that this is the place of prayer, that one day the temple will be rebuilt here. And fathers lovingly and mothers teach their children to love this place. And if we teach our children that we can't go there, then we really, really, really have a problem and have to close up shop. And this is the shop now. This is the 66th year of the shop. The shop is the state of Israel. So don't say that it's irresponsible for us to take our children there. What's irresponsible is that the security forces act like, I don't know, what's the word? They act like they have no authority. And that and those that are assigned to protect the Jewish people in their sovereign state and to demonstrate and exude morality, sovereignty, and the rule of law are powerless in the face of the scourge of Islam. And again, we're a little bit extreme here. You don't have to listen if you don't want to. You can complain, but it's about Islam. It's not about a group. It's not about Hamas versus Ashraf. It's not about radical Islam. It's not about the fundamentalists. It's about Islam. This is the face of Islam. Don't bother talking to me about Islam. If you have a question, I'll be glad to answer. Are you asking me or are you telling me? Don't talk to me about Islam until you visit the Temple Institute's Facebook page and look at the pictures of the rocks inside the mosque from where they come out like the winged monkeys on The Wizard of Oz, or Valkyries, or from the Night of the Living Dead, from which they come to descend upon the Jewish women and children. Don't talk to me about equality, about holiness, about prejudice, about religion, until you look at the rocks inside the mosque, and then show me the rocks in the great synagogue, or in the holy temple, or in the local shul. Show me the rocks that we have on the corner to pelt the Christians that go by on the corner with, right? Don't talk to me about Islam until you see the rocks, and until you see the film, until you see the crowds of hundreds of people. I'm talking about men in their 60s and 70s and women following these Jews and basically torturing them, like walking them, like look at pictures of like the Nazis like escorting the Jews to like a mass grave and executing them there, and look at the faces of these Muslims that are getting into these children's faces and trying to terrify them on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And don't bother unless, discussing this unless you take a look at that. Oh, there's the music. Sorry, I didn't have my earphones in. Temple Talk. We'll be right back. Israel National Radio.
Shalom and welcome back. Temple Talk, Israel National Radio, UniversalTorah.com, Temple Institute's YouTube channel. Today, the 29th day of the month of Nisan, 5774, 29th day of the month of April, 2014. And tonight, Rabbi, which begins the 30th day of Nisan, actually is also the first day of a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, which introduces the new month of Iyar, known in biblical times in the Tanakh as Ziv. Iyar, which has a lot of different meanings, also means illumination because it has the word or in it, light. And of course, Ziv means brilliance or brightness. And why not? Because really, Passover, Pesach, which we wrapped up a week ago, is sort of just the opening salvo in an entire season that celebrates our independence, our freedom from slavery and our march toward spiritual freedom and independence and maturity, which is manifest in the receiving of Torah, which of course we commemorate and celebrate on Shavuot, which is the 50th day after the opening day of Passover. And of course, right now we're in the middle of the Sphira, of the counting of the Omer, you mentioned earlier, today being the 14th day of the counting of the Omer, and this coming week, of course, we're going to be celebrating the independence of the modern state of Israel, which really, it's something totally new in the world, but it's also something totally not new, because independence and freedom here in the land of Israel is a theme as old as Passover and a theme as old as Shavuot. And of course, later on in the month, there's Jerusalem Day, in which we celebrate the reunification of Jerusalem. There's Lag BaOmer. There's all sorts of celebrations. It's literally a season of freedom and independence for the Jewish people here in the land of Israel. And I think it's just, it's such a wonderful time of year. And, the weather, the springtime was created in order to, help us celebrate this freedom and independence. It's sort of a twin blessing of independence and the wonderful spring, atmosphere. And my prayer, Rabbi, is that, everything that we discussed in the first half of the show, what took place in the Temple Mount, that, again, maybe it will be the beginning of a greater consensus and a wider understanding, and
it's all for good.
Another move toward even greater independence.
It's
here.
all part of the rebuilding. It's all a stage in the rebuilding. And yet, this is the most beautiful time of year. It's a beautiful month. Of course, long-time listeners of Temple Talk know that today is always the most important day of the year. This is always the most important month. This is always the most important parsha. This is always the most important moment, because that's what we always say, no matter when it is. And that's an art, really, to be able to do. But the fact is, that's really the way we live our lives. And if you are living for Hashem and everything is connected, you're connecting the dots with the saga of your own life, which is, by the way, what Sefirat Omer is all about, because one of the ideas of Usafartem Lachem, which is the verse in Leviticus 23, is, it means, and you shall count for yourselves. But that word also is the same word that's rooted in Sefer, which is a book. And what is a book? Sipur, which is a story, and sapphire, which is sapphire. So you tell your own story. You're writing your own book. Counting the Sphira, counting the days of the Omer, is writing the story of your life and making the days of your life shine. But that's another story that we'll talk about. But I want to say something else about connecting the dots that you mentioned. You're talking about Iyar, the month of Iyar, which is called in the Torah Ziv. You're talking about the transition from Passover. You're talking about the counting of the Omer. You're talking about Passover and Shavuot, and you're talking about the modern day holidays of the State of Israel, of Remembrance Day and Independence Day and Jerusalem Day. And you're talking about what happened on the Temple Mount, which, by the way, again, to end on a positive note, all those horrible things that we went through over Passover, and the degradation, which is the most horrible thing of all, the lack of sovereignty and the shame of how Israel deals with the blight of the protests, of the violence, of those that are trying to make their statement that we will keep Jews off the Temple Mount, because they also want to keep us out of Jews. They also want to keep us out of Eretz Israel altogether, by the way. But again, what came out of it is that a line has been crossed. People saw that film of how the kids were treated. People are beginning to understand that it's not normal for a country that is a Jewish country that has one holy site to say that we can't go there on the most important days of the year. And all people are starting to think, wait a minute, is this really, does this something wrong with this picture or not? So that's all good. But on a deeper level, Yitzchak, kings Kings 1, chapter 6 and verse 1. We read there in that verse, in the 480th year after the children of Israel's exodus from the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, again, because we start counting from Nisan, so it's Nisan Iyar, he built the temple for Hashem, the Lord. In other words, the month of Iyar is the month in which the first temple was built by King Solomon. It was begun and called by the Torah the second month. And that is amazing, because the whole theme of the month of Iyar is the building of the first temple. And the building of the first temple, when we talk about the building of the temple, the Commonwealth of Israel, Solomon's time, we're not just talking again about a building or a facade or a ritual. We're talking about the purpose of Israel in the world, and the continuation of the purpose of Israel in the world, which is to be a vessel to hold Hashem's light and to sanctify God's name and to reach out to the world with everything that is the purpose of life that we do when the temple is in our midst. That's exactly what the state of Israel should really be and will be completely and is beginning to be. So the beauty of Iyar being which is the bridge itself between, you know the beautiful thing that we've talked about in the past, that some commentators explain how the days of the counting of the Omer are actually like one long Chol HaMoed, like the intermediary days between Passover and Shavuot. It's like one long holiday.
Right.
But the Iyar becomes a living bridge of time from the temple of Solomon to the third temple, because this is the time of temple rebuilding. The temple building was built in this month, and that's why it's so beautiful that this is the month of the establishment of the state of Israel, because that is the continuation of the building of the temple in our time. So if every month, as taught by our sages, has its own tikkun, right, its own purpose and rectification, its own part to play in God's ultimate plan for the redemption, this month, as we learned there in that verse in Kings 1, chapter 6, verse 1, this was under the rule of King Solomon. This is construction of the first temple began. So in our generation, we are continuing with the construction of the third temple. So in general, like you say, it's like this month has a very intense character of preparation and anticipation. This whole month is taken up with anticipation, because all throughout this month we are observing the unique commandment of counting the days of the Omer, right? Leviticus 23, you shall count for yourselves. It's a great spiritual progression wherein we are basically counting 7 complete weeks that mark the passage from Passover to Shavuot. And it's a very human quality. It's something that everybody knows. We all experience it at any age. When we were kids, when we were adults, we count in anticipation to things that we're looking forward to.
Count down, count up.
And that's what these days are all about. And we are so enthralled with the idea of coming out of Passover, coming out of Egypt, constricted consciousness. We didn't deserve it. We were taken out of there, blinding flash of light, and then let down to the place where we need to count to get back to where we started from, to get back to the place where we will be able to stand at Mount Sinai upright. You know, the whole idea, the Torah teaches, Chazal, our sages, very deep ideas about how on the second night of Passover, and actually we've had photographs, again, the story on the Temple Institute's Facebook page about the actual reenactment, the drill of the harvesting of the barley and the roasting of the kernels of the barley and the bringing of the barley, which is what the days of Sfirat HaOmer is all about, because on the second day of Passover, there is a commandment to harvest the new grain. But barley is called ma'achal behema. It is a sign of immature mentality, the Kabbalists call it, constricted consciousness, because raw barley is animal food. It can't be processed by a person, but yet that's the offering in the temple on the second day of Passover. And it represents the fact that although we have gained our physical emancipation, we've come out of Egypt, we're still embryonic in our mentality. We still have the mentality of slavery and that's why we had the debacle when we came to the sea. We didn't even know what to do. We were thinking, oh, maybe we should just go back to Egypt because we weren't ready to be free people yet. You can't receive the Torah until you're free, a human ready to receive responsibility and accept the choice that I don't have to, but I want to. So we count during these 7 weeks, which are known as a time of tremendous spiritual potential. I believe we've used the word saturated in the past, how these days are saturated with spiritual potential and meaning. And we count off these levels of the 49 levels of impurity with which we were afflicted in the Egyptian bondage, and we count back up to the place where on Shavuot, in the Holy Temple, we observe the festival by bringing the only time the entire year when we are able to bring leavened bread in the temple, chametz, which normally we don't have in the temple because of the same reason that we don't have it on Passover, because it represents ego, haughtiness, the rising of our arrogance, something that leavens. But on Shavuot, that is not a danger. And we bring this unique offering of the twin loaves of bread, wheat bread, which is the bread of man, which is food of man, because armed with the Torah, which we received at Mount Sinai, we are able to do that. We're able to be people, to rise to our fullest potential. So that's the transition from Passover to Shavuot. So this is a time of spiritual potential and growth that's coming up right now, beginning tonight, the month of Iyar, which is called by the Torah the month of Ziv, which we have discussed now is the month of the beginning of the construction of the first temple, and how apropos that it is the time in our generations in which the foundation for the third temple was laid, because that is what the state of Israel is. Yes, it is the foundation for the new temple. And of course, it is the time when we count up to Shavuot. And then there's the other aspect that we also emphasize, that the later sages talk about, the name Iyar, which is spelled Aleph Yud Yud Resh, which stands for Ani Hashem Rofecha, which is also found in Exodus in chapter 15 and verse 26, where God says, I, the Lord, am your healer. And that is an acronym, Ani Hashem Rofecha, which forms the word Iyar, and that teaches us that the month of Iyar is especially associated with physical healing and well-being, and that, of course, is connected to the fact that this is the month during which the manna began to fall in the desert. So all told, this month of Iyar, we have a lot to look forward to. Mm-hmm. We're counting every day. We're working on our character traits. We are getting ready for receiving the Torah real time also this year. And we are trying to avail ourselves of the healing element of the month. And then again, this month of Iyar in our time is intrinsically bound up with the restoration of the Jewish people to her own land in our time, right? We're leaving now. The end of Nisan was marked with Holocaust Memorial Day, and we go now into Iyar, so bound up with the theme of Jewish survival and success and accomplishment, because we have the birth of the state of Israel, the return of the Jewish people, and on the deepest level, we understand that the state of Israel's inception during this month is actually the continuation of the work that King Solomon began at this very time. If that's what the state of Israel can be, that's what we want it to be, that's what we make it, the vessel for the anticipation and preparation of the new Holy Temple, which of course is the very heart of what it means to be healed. So talk about healing this month. That's what, in fact, you know what? The highest point of this month is Israel Independence Day, and that is the embodiment of everything that the month of Iyar represents, because it is preparation, anticipation, and healing. So we have a lot to be thankful for, and with everything that transpired during the period of Passover over the Temple Mount, that was so difficult and so how should I say it? What is the word I'm looking for? It was so, I don't know, gut-wrenching. It was so absolutely, existentially unraveling with all of it. You know what I always say? Things have never been as good as they are now. The best of times, the worst of times, the best of times, because everybody knows that it's not going to continue, and everybody knows that the Jewish people are ready for this change. And you know who feels it and knows it more than anybody? The Muslims that are usurping and squatting on and strangulating the Temple Mount. They know very well that the time has come for the Jewish people to rise up and build the temple. And you know what, Yitzchak, it's just reverberating through all aspects of society here. It's so beautiful how people are coming together about this. And you know that there are all sorts of people visiting the Temple Mount. There are all sorts of personalities that are beginning to ask questions and identify with this and say there's something terribly, terribly wrong with it. And if you heard the descriptions and look at the pictures and saw the video and hear our heartfelt pain over the situation of the honor and dignity of the Shekhinah and the Temple Mount, please don't be dissuaded or in any way hesitant to visit the Temple Mount. And I must say that I'm flooded with requests for accompaniment and guiding on the Temple Mount, and I try to answer every single request in a timely fashion. And I've made up with many, many people in the coming days and weeks for bringing them to the Temple Mount, because you know what? It's the only thing to do. It's the only place to be. Is it easy to go? No. It's sometimes disheartening, and sometimes it is even unnerving. But it is a rich spiritual experience that will be a beginning of the rest of your life, to know that you were there, to know that you visited this place and that you stood up for the dignity and honor of God Himself. And it just pulls you like a magnet, and it changes everything, and it washes over you with tremendous clarity and purpose and purity, because this is the place that Hashem chose, and that's all there is to it. And of course there are going to be people, if that's what they are, who are trying to distract us and take it away and say, no, there is no Hashem, and He didn't choose this, and who are you, and you don't belong here, and that's just a sign of everything being exactly on schedule.
Yep. So if you do go up, you can really mark yourself down as being a pioneer, making history, because just as Jews came to the land of Israel 100 years ago, and even more than 100 years ago, in order to make a presence here, and they were, just a cry in the wilderness when they came, because of the small numbers. It makes a difference. This is how we change history. This is how we get back to where we need to go. So yeah, come to the Temple Mount. You're in good hands if you go up with Rabbi Richman. Trust me. And you will be changed, and you will also be making a change in the lay of the land and in the history of the world by going up. That's a fact. Rabbi.
And it's so much a part of our consciousness, of our society, of our culture. Again, it's just, I see it coming from every direction, this tremendous empathy, identification, connection from every aspect of Israeli society. And I've said this before, but I just think this is so amazing, how people are not aware of this. And I know I've done this before, but I got to do it again. You take out of your pocket, if you happen to have a good day, you take out of your pocket a 50 shekel bill. 50 shekel bill is the purple bill with a picture of it of Shmuel Yosef Agnon, who is known by the acronym of Shai Agnon, who was Israel's Nobel laureate in 1966. He's considered to be one of the fathers of Hebrew literature, especially Hebrew fiction. He's a very great writer, and he was a religious man. He wore a big black kippah, and when he accepted the Nobel Prize in Stockholm in 1966, he said, he made a speech, and it's written on the back of the 50 shekel bill. Here's a piece of paper everyone has in their pocket, and they go and they buy a Coke and a falafel. You know what it says on the back of this bill, his acceptance speech? He says, from some historical catastrophe that Titus, the king of Rome, destroyed Jerusalem and exiled Israel from their land, I was born because of that in one of the cities of the diaspora. But at all time, by the way, he was born in Hungary, in Galicia, but at all time, he says, I was like someone who was born in Jerusalem, and in my night vision and my dream, I saw myself standing with my fellow brothers, my fellow Levites in the holy temple, singing with them the songs of David, king of Israel. And he goes on to describe this feeling of being a Levite, singing the Psalms in the holy temple. And that's everybody in Israel. As a 50 shekel bill, they go and they buy lunch or something. It doesn't go very far. And the back of it is carrying the most beautiful, staggering, poetic, romantic testimony to how a Jew feels connected on some deep level to the Holy Temple. And that, to me, is just a symbol of how Israeli society is geared completely here. It's the month of Ziv. This is the time of the building of the first temple and the foundation of the third temple. Here it is. It's right here on the 50 shekel note.
So Chodesh Tov to everybody. A good month of Ziv/Iyar. It's the season of our liberation, our freedom, our independence, and the building of the Holy Temple. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.